We're delighted everybody is here and coming out on this cold night for a warm, rousing conversation about plastics pollution, plastics problem. My name is David Bond. I'm the Associate Director of CAPA, the Center for the Advancement of Public Action, where we are now. And one of the best parts of this gig has been supporting and hosting in some way the launch of Beyond Plastics here, and just stepping back and watching Judith go to work and start to build a regional, a national, and an international conversation about the growing crisis of plastics. And all of that troublemaking now culminates, as of yesterday, with this wonderful and timely book, The Problem with Plastics, which is why we're all gathered here tonight. Judith was on the phone with Ralph Nader this morning, an interview about the book, and I think some of you heard on the way here the NPR Marketplace piece about the book. And on Monday, Amy Goodman, Democracy Now! But this is the first actual in-person book event.
Yes.
So we are delighted to be hosting what I'm sure will be many, many celebrations about this book, which really is a bright and inspiring light in these very dark times. It's also fitting that we're launching this book, I think, at Bennington, Vermont. A town that in the 70s pinned all of its hopes onto plastics, rebranded itself Teflon Town in the hopes that plastics would pull it out of the decline of good-paying factory jobs and into a new generation of prosperity. As we know, those factories have closed and we've been left with a giant pile of forever chemicals. And it's a kind of parable of plastics that we all know very, very well. That this book also is an appropriate sort of place to talk about. I just want to talk about the order of the schedule tonight. I'm going to start the conversation with Judith about the book, ask a few questions to start the conversation. We then want to hear from you all and have some questions and conversation with you. And then around 8:15 or so, we'll keep the conversation going in the faculty lounge with drinks and snacks. And Judith signing all of the books you want to buy. We have a great discount. They'll be $17, and we can take credit card or cash and sign and sort of keep the conversation going. I thought maybe we could start, Judith, with you reading the opening 2 paragraphs, if that's okay.
Sure. These 2?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, before I read to you, I want to say thank you. Thank you for coming out. Thank you to David for organizing this. And it means so much to me to have this at Bennington College, which has been the welcoming home for Beyond Plastics. This was just kind of a crazy idea I had after leaving the Obama administration, and now we have grown to a staff of 19. Our goal is to end plastic pollution everywhere. And when I say that at various conferences, people kind of chuckle, but that really is our mission. And students, thank you for coming. You should all take my class. It's 7 weeks, the beginning of the spring and fall semester, on Wednesday evenings on Zoom. And community folks can audit the class. So since COVID, we offered the class on Zoom, and we have this wonderful mix of community folks auditing the class and above average Bennington students taking the class. And it's a really nice dynamic. So the cover of the book is plastic free. Most book covers have a lining of plastic, but I'm so grateful to the publisher, which is the New Press. They also publish Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. Highly recommend you look at the catalog of thenewpress.org. And they went out of their way to find a cover without plastic. So we're off to a good start. Here's the introduction. Life in plastic. Plastic is everywhere, wrapped around our food, stitched into our clothes, even coursing through our veins. What began as a marvel of modern science has been woven so tightly into the fabric of our lives that imagining a world without it seems impossible. Plastic has fueled groundbreaking innovations from artificial joints to renewable energy technology, yet its legacy is one of poisoned oceans, polluted air, and ecosystems choked by waste. In just 75 years, plastic has cradled our planet in a synthetic embrace. You want the next paragraph?
Oh, you can go over there, it's fine. It gives a good sense of it. But the writing is really, really great and really capturing. The world of plastics is about 75 years old. Many of our grandparents recall growing up in a world before plastics. Another way of putting it, plastics are baby boomers. They're everyday ubiquity, born in the general prosperity after World War II, which also means plastics are just past retirement age. Plastics are recent. How has such a recent invention, one that we often see as kind of flimsy, disposable, insignificant, how has such a recent invention become such a permanent part of our lives and our world? And why is it so hard to imagine a world beyond plastics if they're so recent?
Well, plastics are made from fossil fuels that get enormous taxpayer subsidy and chemicals. And for a lot of businesses, it's cheap. But it's not really cheap when you look at the environmental externalities, what it does to the planet, what it does to our health. And what we need to do is make sure that the true cost of plastic is built into products. No one I know wants more plastic in their lives, and they certainly don't want more plastic in their bodies. None of us voted for more plastics. And yet, the choice of avoiding plastic has almost been taken away from us if you enter any modern American supermarket. There are viable alternatives, but we're up against powerful special interests. You know, when I started Beyond Plastics a number of years ago, first thing I did is I went around and talked to national environmental groups and asked them, are you gonna do more work on plastics? And they were very busy with climate change. Of course, I told them plastics is a climate change issue. But they said, you know, you should do it. Thank you. And I think what they didn't say, and I now fully realize, is when you work on plastics, you're taking on the fossil fuel industry, the chemical industry, the plastics industry, and consumer brand companies. Who in their right mind would do that? So it's really political barriers that stand in the way of less plastic.
But for so many ordinary people, it's when we talk about needing to move beyond plastic, it seems an impossible utopia, like a completely exotic other world that's so far removed from the one we're in, it's hard to figure out the pathway from here to there. Why do you think it's so hard for us to sort of see a world beyond plastics as within reach?
Well, for one reason, we've all been subjected to a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign telling us, don't worry about all your plastics, just toss it in your recycling bin. And tonight we'll talk about why plastics recycling doesn't work. And it's a hard issue. I mean, if it was easy, it would have been solved a long time ago, but there are alternatives to plastic. And, you know, and I want to state, I'm not against all plastics. Sometimes you need plastic for like wind turbines and car bumpers, making cars more fuel efficient. Though I don't see wind turbine blades and car bumpers on the beach or on the side of the road. So we're really focused on pointless plastic where there are ample alternatives.
Yeah. I just want to move on a little bit to your own career.
He's a really difficult interviewer. I don't know if you...
There was no trick questions. There was no like sneaky...
I don't know if you watched The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, of course. So Monday night, my friend Elizabeth Colbert was on. She's in Williamstown talking about her new book. And my goodness, Jon Stewart really gave her a hard time, and I'm kind of feeling like I'm in the hot seat. Next question.
Here's a softball.
Okay, John.
As an undergraduate student, you cut your environmental activism teeth on a bottle bill. And after a truly remarkable resume of advancing environmental justice on all fronts, from scrappy nonprofits to the corner office of the EPA, from neighborhood groups to the White House, from really, really advancing environmental justice in a substantive way on all fronts, you're kind of returning to this issue. I'm wondering if you could just talk out a little bit of that arc of your career and how plastics have figured in all of the venues that you've had the privilege of sort of pushing environmental justice within.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm right back where I started. So when I was a college student, I was an intern with New York Public Interest Research Group, NYPIRG, the Pentagon of public interest research groups. It just turns out people doing really important environmental and consumer work. And it's similar to fieldwork term. So you want to pick your host organization really carefully. You want to do the Endeavor Environmental Action Fellowship Program, which my colleague Alexis Goldsmith now runs, and which is supported by the Endeavor Foundation, who's in the room tonight. Thank you, Isabel. So get that real life experience. I was a political science major, and remember the graphic, how a bill becomes law, you know, it's the hopper and this committee structure. None of that is true. So I jumped into the New York State Legislature as an advocate. My first year, I did not pass the bottle bill. And then I came back. You all know what the bottle bill is. You have it here in Vermont, one of 10 states. So then I came back and I said to NYPIRG, I want to try again. They said, we've never had anyone do the internship twice. I said, not a problem, I'll do it again. So I took my classes at night and still didn't pass it. And then after that, I graduated college. And I couldn't find an environmental job in Albany except for one at Environmental Advocates. They were hiring an office manager for $100 a week. And I really wanted to stay in Albany for two reasons. One is I wanted to pass the bottle bill, and second, I was really sweet on this guy who I've been married to for 44 years and who's here tonight, Mark, taking pictures. He looks really happy about the story. So I dated Mark, and then I passed the bottle bill the same year. We got married in '82, right? Yeah, that was the year we passed the bottle bill. I'm sharing too much. I'm an oversharer. And then, I did advocacy work, and then worked in the New York Attorney General's office for 8 years, governor's office. And then one of the greatest honors of my professional life was being appointed EPA Region 2 Regional Administrator by President Obama. That was a blast. I had 800 staff. I didn't have to fundraise, and I got to work on issues like Hoosick Falls drinking water contamination, and that's how I met Susan Scribati and David Bond and Isabel and Bennington students who so impressed me. The Bennington professors threw the students into the deep end and had the students doing research, assisting community people, understanding technical scientific information. And that was a great, great introduction to Bennington. And at the time, I was thinking about starting a group working on plastics, and Bennington College welcomed me, and now I'm working on plastics and improving the bottle bills all over the country. So I guess that has kind of come full circle. It's a little depressing, actually.
From that 1980s bottle bill to sort of beyond plastics today, have plastics always been sort of part of that environmental work that you've been doing, or has it been just sort of lost in the shuffle of a whole host of things? And I'm curious how it's figured in all of the different venues you've worked in.
Well, it is a through line, for sure. And also, when I was at EPA, my region had more toxic waste sites than any other region in the country because I had New Jersey in my region. Nothing against New Jersey. And a lot of these toxic waste sites were created because of the production of plastic or the use of fossil fuels or chemicals. So it has indeed been a through line, which is a little depressing.
And I'm curious at this moment, at the sort of after that remarkable resume of accomplishments, Why do you think that plastics is the fight we should prioritize? Why is this the big fight we have to have right now?
Because the implications are so serious. We'll talk about microplastics being found in every part of our body. We'll talk about the environmental justice issues, the climate change issues, the fact that we're turning the ocean into a watery landfill, and the injustice of it all. And I like to go where there are unmet needs. I mean, climate change is super important, and we have to keep working on climate change. But there are a lot of people working on climate change. There's not a lot of people working on plastics. And I feel like we kind of have public attention right now, which is one reason we wrote the book, but we don't have a lot of time to change the trajectory. I think in about 5 or 6 years, elected officials and environmental regulators are going to look back and say, why didn't we do more? And I don't want to wait 5 or 6 years. I want to get action on plastics reduction now.
It's great. I'm convinced. To jump into the book a bit, the content of the book, one of the ways you can read the book, which I did, is a bit like a criminal indictment. Going through the crimes of the plastics industry one by one by one, rejecting their sort of flimsy excuses, their half measures, and their outright lies, without ever losing sight of the felonies and the real harm that's occurring because these crimes are allowed to continue. And I'd love to sort of just unpack a few of those criminal charges against the plastics industry.
Thank you, Counselor.
The first is the question of plastics and human health. I mean, I think a lot of us have grown uncomfortable with plastics, thinking they're out there. They're an eyesore, they're a nuisance, they're a problem out there. But so much of the science that you start to gather together, and the medical science, is about how they are already deeply embedded within all of us, and unsafely so. And I'm wondering if you could talk out a little bit about this charge that you make about how plastics are a great public health crisis that we're only beginning to understand the scale of.
So the way we all get plastics in our bodies is we breathe it in through our nose, where we swallow it. And just in the last few years, scientists have done peer-reviewed studies that have identified the presence of microplastics in our bodies. Do you know what a microplastic is? It's a little shard of plastic, 5 millimeters or less, the size of a grain of sand. And even smaller than that is nanoplastics. So as we're breathing it in or swallowing it, and you could be breathing it in due to carpet, at home, there are microplastics in the air. You could be swallowing it because it's been found in seafood, in honey, in beer, thankfully not yet in wine, and also just from plastic packaging. So if you have a plastic water bottle, which no one here has tonight, thank you very much, single-use plastic water bottle. That's reusable, right? Yeah, we're gonna get you a metal one. So if you have a single-use plastic water bottle, every time you turn the cap, that abrasion, a little bit of microplastic falls into your overpriced water. So scientists have found microplastics in human blood, kidneys, lungs, liver, heart arteries. It attaches to plaque. And there was a study recently that if you have microplastics on heart plaque, you have an increased risk of heart attack, stroke, and premature death. It's also recently been found in the human brain. It has crossed the blood-brain barrier and has been linked to Alzheimer's disease, another neurological disease. Microplastics have also been found in the human placenta, the fetal side and the maternal side, and in breast milk. So our babies are being born pre-polluted. Now let me attempt a joke after telling you all of this. We are, because it's a little intense, right? And it's very serious. So we're working on a bill in the New York State Legislature to reduce the use of single-use packaging of all kinds. It's called the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. We almost passed it last session. It passed the Senate 2 years in a row, died on the Assembly floor. We're coming back again in January. So we have this wonderful Senate sponsor, Senator Pete Harckham from the Lower Hudson Valley. He's on the Senate floor defending the bill for like 3 hours. And this floor of the New York State Senate is a little weird at times. They're not listening to other senators during the debate. Often their heads are down, not in prayer, but they are looking at their phones or convincing with each other. So at the end of the debate, and Senator Harckham was making so many good points, climate change, oceans, recycling failure, etc. At the end of the debate, he mentions, and microplastics have been found in human testicles. And all of their heads went, oh! And their eyes fogged out, and suddenly they were paying attention. And I said to the senator, you really buried the lead. You should have opened with that. But it was just such a reminder that people are interested in what it's like, what's literally just happening in their own reproductive organs. So that's the only funny thing I can say about plastics and health, because it is quite serious. Of course, the studies need to be replicated, and that's why cuts in federal research is so devastating. At the EPA, Lee Zeldin, get this on tape, the worst EPA administrator in history, has eliminated the Office of Research and Development at the EPA. That was the largest office there. So what we're going to see is studies coming out of Europe, India, Africa, and academia, because the federal government will shut down these studies.
So it feels like we're at the tip of the iceberg, like the cover. We're just starting to realize how many plastics are already in our bodies. A lot of us think, I mean, you talk about this in the book, that plastics are inert, that they're not necessarily dangerous, they don't react to things, they're not toxic in the ways that a lot of other chemicals are toxic and dangerous. And yet so much of this research, as you go through, begins to sort of document the ways inert is not in itself benign.
Right.
And can you talk out a little bit about how that inertness of plastics is actually coming into a new light as a new kind of property that can be toxic in itself?
So there are 16,000 chemicals used to make plastic, and they are hitchhiking on the microplastics. So I just recited where microplastics are in our bodies, and there's kind of the physicality of this. It's not good for your GI system, for instance, but also the toxic chemicals are attaching to the little bits of microplastic that get in our body, get in our agricultural soil, get in fish, get in seabirds. And so it's kind of a double hit. And plastics never degrade. There's no such thing as biodegradable plastics. And whatever
they just keep getting smaller and smaller.
Exactly. And on a certain level, the microplastics and the nanoplastics are a bigger risk than, say, a whole plastic bottle. And I encourage all of you to do what I do and drive my family crazy. When you're out in the world, look down. You will be shocked at how many little tiny pieces of plastic you see on the ground. And then when it rains, it gets washed into storm sewers.
So one of the big criminal charges made against plastics is this charge of plastics in human health. Another one of the big charges laid out is the relation of plastics to the climate crisis. And the book asks us, every time we see a piece of plastic or a disposable bag or anything like this, to think of barrels of oil, to think of oil pipelines, to think of oil wells, to think of the oil industry. That plastics, you write, are a lifeline for the oil industry in this moment of climate crisis. And I'm wondering if you could talk out a little bit about the earlier reports you've done on plastics as the new coal, and also the ways that plastics is sort of helping the fossil fuels transition into more evil forms of planet-killing profits.
So who can name the largest plastic producer in the United States? Take a guess.
Exxon.
Exxon. Yes, ExxonMobil is the #1 plastic producer, but that's not what you think of when you think of Exxon, right? You think of fossil fuels, petroleum products. So historically, plastics were made from chemicals and oil, now chemicals and ethane, a byproduct of hydrofracking. So a number of years ago, behind closed doors, the fossil fuel industry realized they're losing part of their market share for selling fossil fuel for the two major sales markets. One is transportation, cars, buses, trucks. What's going on with transportation? Electric cars, and even now electric buses, electric trucks, etc. And hopefully more walkable communities, safer bike lanes. So the fossil fuel companies knew they were going to lose money on that market. The second big use of fossil fuels is to generate electricity at power plants. And within that sector, until the incumbent president was elected, there was a real shift toward clean, renewable energy. Coal plants were being shut down. So the fossil fuel industry decided their next big growth area was plastics. And so that's why we talk about plastics being plan B for the fossil fuel industry. So a couple years ago, I wanted to figure out just how much greenhouse gas emissions come from plastic. So we did a report, and we looked at the 10 distinct ways that greenhouse gas emissions are associated with plastic, everything from fracking at the wellhead to disposal. And we found that in 2020, the US plastics industry was responsible for 232 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And that is the equivalent of 116 coal-fired power plants. So
116 coal-fired?
116, average size coal-fired power plants. So as we're working hard to shut down coal-fired power plants, the greenhouse gas emissions are being replaced. And a point I always make when I'm on the WAMC roundtable on Friday mornings, I'll be on this Friday, is even if we turned the tide on greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, they last for decades. So all of the violent weather we're seeing around the world, the flooding, the more intense hurricanes, wildfires, intense heat, even if we turned off greenhouse gas emissions today, we still have to contend with them for 30, 40, 50 years.
And plastics production is amping up fast. And the fossil fuel industry is building all kinds of new plastics facilities all across the US in anticipation for this growth that can replace the diminishing sales of gasoline and a whole host of other things as transportation is electrified. And the book sort of goes through all of the ways that this is a transition. And I'm curious if you think that this is this a moment when the fossil fuel industry is strong? Or is this actually a moment of potential weakness as they're transitioning from one kind of market where they're selling all of their goods towards transportation to have to shift to something else? Is this, as they shift towards plastics, is this a moment when they're actually weaker than we might expect?
Well, a year and a half ago, I would have said yes, but there was this federal election, and that is propping up the fossil fuel industry with more subsidies. The federal energy policy now, it used to be American Energy Independence. Now it's called energy, they want to export energy to other countries, fossil fuels, LNG. What's the word they use, Mark? It's a really macho word. I'm blocking it out. Energy dominance. Thank you. That's why I was blocking it out. It's such a ridiculous word. So they're looking for more markets, and they don't exist without big federal subsidies. So you got to follow the money. I don't know. I mean, it's not great economics, but at the same time, they've got a lot of public subsidy.
In this moment when plastics is being amped up, especially the single-use plastics, I mean, the book notes these crazy facts that today the average American uses 500 pounds of plastics each year. half of the plastic ever used, like ever, has been used since 2007.
Yep.
That the world of plastics is exploding by leaps and bounds, exponential increases in the production of plastics. And yet the plastics industry, which is also the fossil fuel industry, has this great line. It's okay. We can recycle it all. We can recycle our way out of this crisis. Can you talk a little bit about the long-standing falsehood of this claim and this celebration of recycling?
Sure. Yeah, and that's why also I'm optimistic, because this is actually a very recent problem when you look at the overall scheme of things, and we have time to reverse it. So let me state for the record, if there's a Bible here, I will put my hand on it. I support recycling. Keep recycling your paper, cardboard, metal, glass. Compost your yard waste and food waste. But plastics recycling has been an abysmal failure. It's never worked, it never will work. And I want you all to listen really closely, because people are going to get upset with you when you say plastic recycling is a failure. It's like saying there's no Santa Claus, which is not true. So if you wanted to recycle an aluminum can, you can recycle that into a new aluminum can. If you've got a newspaper, you can recycle that and it'll become another paper product or cardboard. It doesn't work that way with plastics. There are 16,000 different chemicals, numerous plastic polymers, and many, many different colors. So think of your own home or your dorm room. You might have a bright plastic, bright orange, heavy plastic detergent bottle to do your laundry. And then in your refrigerator, you might have black plastic for takeout food. And you really want to avoid black plastic, by the way. Those two plastics can't be recycled together. They're different colors, they're a different chemical concoction, and they're different polymers. So you would literally have to have hundreds, if not thousands, of different sorts. You could theoretically recycle all of the bright orange detergent bottles together, but that would be different than your plastic bag and different sorting for your polystyrene. So plastics recycling has never worked, it never will work. The people who know this are the people who make plastics. Yet, they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars advertising, saying, don't worry about all your single-use plastic, just toss it in the recycling bin. It is so serious that the California Attorney General, Rob Bonta, sued ExxonMobil in September of 2024 because of their deceptive claims about plastics recycling and chemical recycling. He's going to win that lawsuit because it's all about math. The nice thing about recycling coordinators is they keep really good records. So they're going to depose the LA recycling coordinator and say, how many plastic bags did you recycle in LA? And they'll say, less than 1%. Then they're going to depose the recycling coordinator in San Diego. How many plastic milk jugs did you recycle? Maybe 2% if you're lucky. And so the math won't math. And Exxon's going to lose that lawsuit. And I think the remedy is going to be that they have to start telling the truth.
But all of the plastics have those great little recycling signs on them.
Right.
And all of us earnestly wash out our plastics and put them in the little recycling bin and take them to the curb every week.
Yeah, so I think you can recycle if it says number 1 or number 2, but nothing else. And the only plastic that really has a high recycling rate is PET soda bottles in bottled states like Vermont, because it's kept separate and kept clean. Most other plastics never get recycled.
How much of the plastics are actually recycled?
5 to 6% nationwide. It's never been in double digits, even when the US was exporting plastics to China, and China closed their doors and said, don't send us any more so-called recyclables. So a 5 to 6% recycling rate after all these years is pretty abysmal.
We haven't even gotten to all of the solutions, the brilliant, innovative solutions you offer up, and all of the really inspiring stories, so many of them from women standing up on the front lines of this crisis to begin to offer models of how to resist the plastics industry and begin to hold them to account. But I know we're getting a little bit late, so I want to sort of open it up to questions from you all, so we can hear from you all.
But before we do questions, and they have to be easy ones, I want to thank a few people in the room. My colleague Alexis Goldsmith, are you here? So Alexis helped write the book. She's at Beyond Plastics. This was an amazing group effort. I want to thank Laura Walker, the president of Bennington College, who's been a huge supporter of Beyond Plastics. Isabel Roche, who is Laura's predecessor here and who's now at the Endeavor Foundation. We're joined by State Representative Will Greer, a recent Bennington graduate who we're very proud of. He seems to take his role in politics seriously. Thank you. David Bond, of course. My husband Mark, who I already embarrassed. And you can get more information at beyondplastics.org. Lots of information. Sign up for our free email list. It'll make you laugh. It'll make you cry. You will know that there are people all over the country working on plastics and getting things done. In the book, we profile some amazing women. And there is a gender gap on this issue. Any questions or comments?
Yeah.
Can you give me an idea of what are the major arguments that the plastic lobbyists are making to get in the way of the New York Assembly tackling this law and passing it?
There's a lot of them. We were outnumbered 4-1. I've never seen so many industry lobbyists fly into Albany to kill a bill.
So we should go through.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the bill that you put forward?
Sure. Yeah, so the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, I didn't name it, requires a 30% reduction in single-use packaging over 12 years. It bans the 14 most toxic chemicals used in packaging, and so that's modest because we use 16,000 chemicals in packaging. It puts a modest fee on packaging with the money going to local governments to support waste reduction, refill, reuse, and recycling. And it has a really good definition of recycling, not to allow polluting chemical recycling. It's a great, great bill, and it passed the Senate. And the Assembly blocked it, but it will be coming up again, we hope, this legislative session, which starts in January. The arguments that the industry made was that this would increase consumer prices, which we don't think is a valid argument. They trotted out a report from a professor in Canada, which we rebutted. And they just said the bill is unrealistic. And it's not. I mean, I think when the bill was first proposed, it was a 50% reduction in packaging. Now it's 30%.
Over how many years?
The 50% over 10 years, and now to get it through the Senate, it's 30% over 12 years. But it's still really good because it's reduction as opposed to the increase. So we're going to match the special interest influence with grassroots organizing. We have a lobby day in Albany in February. Thanks to Alexis, people all over the state are getting engaged. And this is a clear example of when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And I am, Alexis, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we will get it through both houses in Albany. We're working on it in New Jersey, and then we'll see what happens with the governor.
What are some international solutions that you admire that you think could be really beneficial to this problem?
Well, the EU is ahead of the United States. They have banned some like 10 specific uses of plastic. There's this cute little policy that I love that we're going to try in the US. It's so modest. We'll see if we can get this through. You know when you not you, but someone you knows buys a plastic bottle of water or Coke and it has the cap. So when I keep hearing from people who've been in Europe recently, the EU has a policy that it's tethered cap. It's connected. Here's an idea for a bill. So, so it reduces litter that way. So modest, right? But Coke and Pepsi will oppose it because they don't want to retool. There are really modest ideas. There are some southern states that they prohibit the intentional release of balloons into the air because what goes up must come down. We're working on something called Skip the Stuff. You know, when you get takeout food and you say, please don't give me utensils or straws or, you know, a whole bunch of napkins and condiments, and you get it anyway, and then you have a drawer in your kitchen that's just overflowing. So in New York City, you only get all of that stuff if you ask for it. And I think we have a good chance of passing that in New Jersey. So I know you said international. There are some countries with bans, but they're not enforced well. And then there was an attempt to get a UN treaty on plastics, but the United States, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and a few other countries
The biggest
blocked it.
producers of fossil fuels.
Yeah, what a coincidence.
It's also a great question, though, the international dimension. And could you talk out a little bit, I mean, the history of managing the plastics problem in the US has often been one of sending it somewhere else.
Right.
And so the global web of this problem has, you know, the US has had a key role in making the plastics problem,
Yeah.
exporting it.
There's actually something called the plastics waste trade, where plastics are collected and sent to other countries and not recycled. You should all watch this great documentary. It won an Emmy called The Story of Plastic, published by an organization called The Story of Stuff. And it's really eye-opening to see what happens when it goes to other countries. In this very room a few years ago, we had a great speaker from Indonesia. Indonesia is flooded with plastic from the US and the EU. Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Turkey for some reason. And there are these businesses, they're called waste brokers, and they buy up all this plastic and then they send it to other countries under the guise of like a tiny amount of it will get recycled and then the rest of it is open burned. It's a mess.
Pet peeve I had was a little plastic piece on a milk carton. You pull it out, throw it away. My second question was medical waste. It's massive. During COVID, is there a tally on how much we went through?
I haven't seen numbers, but it definitely increased. And you know, sometimes in the medical sector, you do need plastic, but it's just swung so far. And there needs to be kind of a reassessment. A friend told me that she brought her parent to the emergency room and the blood pressure cup was single use and they threw it out. It's very stressful to be in the hospital, and it's very stressful to be in the hospital and see all the plastic. And the medical sector needs to do a lot better. There's a group called Healthcare Without Harm that is working on it. We haven't really tackled that yet, but it's on our list for the future.
I was just wondering about your perspective on the model of a circular economy and kind of dream of like accountability and responsibility for like manufacturers of plastic with internal recycling. Like, is that a possibility for you, like that you can imagine, or like, what do you think of it?
Well, the concept of a circular economy is good, but it should be more pinned on reduction, reuse, and refill. We need to build an infrastructure. You know, I hear from winery owners who are paying 80 to 90 cents for a glass bottle, and they would like to have reusable glass bottles, but they just need a commercial bottle washing operation. The closest one is in Montreal. But I don't think plastic recycling is really part of the circular economy per se. And I also am really worried about recycled plastic in food packaging. which we should avoid. The FDA is the agency in charge of whether or not to approve that. They seem to have just a really big rubber stamp and approve any use of recycled content. I think it's probably okay for things like mud flaps and doormats, but not food packaging.
So I was wondering, obviously the most direct contact that we have with plastics would be everyday and like, you know, just single-use plastics like bottles or things like that. But I was wondering if there are also like larger, maybe industrial uses of plastic that also contribute a lot to the problem.
Yeah, so you're right on your everyday exposure, but also your clothing. This is, I think, polyester, and 70% of our clothes are plastic.
70%.
Yeah, 70. And, you know, one little tip I have for people is if you're buying bed sheets, buy cotton sheets, not polyester sheets, because like your face is in the pillows and the blankets all day. But we're also exposed airborne. You know, there are microplastics in the air and also in our drinking water, unfortunately. Do not heat plastics for food, like never put plastic in the microwave, and even avoid, don't have hot tea or hot coffee in plastic cups, especially polystyrene cups, because if you have tea, for instance, which is acidic, the styrene will leach right into your tea. And by the way, there are microplastics in many tea bags. Have a good night.
I mean, one of the shocking little details in the book you go through is that all of the chemical additives that are added to plastics to make them flexible, color them,
Right.
give them different properties, they're not always chemically bonded to the plastics.
Right. Yes.
They're just kind of stuck in that molecule, and there's all kinds of ways they can just migrate out very easily, which I had never sort of, you know, had someone explain that to me clearly.
Oh, God.
Including examples of sometimes the dye on a bottle, right?
Yeah.
Leaching through the bottle and into the liquid it's supposed to be containing.
Yeah, and the real enemy is heat. You do not want hot plastic. And it's not just putting it in the microwave. I remember walking down the street in New York City and there was a giant Coca-Cola delivery truck. Why we spend so much money moving sugar water all over the country, you know, from a greenhouse gas emission. And it was a really hot summer day, and the guy opened the side of the truck, and there's all these plastic soda bottles. And I'm like, it's probably leaching, you know, because it's transportation on hot train cars and trucks. So plastic and heat are not good together.
I have a very practical question, personal. When you go to the grocery store, what the hell do you buy? How do you eat? I mean, do you have practical tips for that?
Yeah, sure. So you cannot shop your way out of the plastic problem, and you shouldn't feel guilty about it. But you want to protect your health. So if you can buy things in glass, and look at things that you use a lot. So for instance, orange juice, for instance, if you have it every morning, instead of buying it in a plastic jug, get the frozen concentrate and just put it in a glass container. You know, we're not big condiment people, so I don't care so much about the ketchup bottle. But, you know, things that you're using a lot, look at your coffee maker. You know, there was just a study on those, sorry everyone, those Keurig cups. You know, that's like hot water going through the plastic. You definitely want to avoid that. Get rid of your plastic cutting board. And the book goes through that. And, you know, what we try to do in the book is give you tips on what you can do in your own life, because that's a good question. And then when you get rid of as much plastic in your own life, then look at your kids' school. Then look at your faith community, look at your civic organization, and kind of climb the civic ladder. And before you know it, you're at a city council meeting advocating for a specific policy. We have models in here. Before you know it, you're Jean and you're walking around the legislature with us every Monday and Tuesday, lobbying for the packaging bill. And at some moment, we might get the federal government back. and they might help as opposed to hurting. But, it starts with your own choices. There's a woman, she's a zero waste chef. I wish I could remember her name. She says, we don't need a small group of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need a lot of people doing it imperfectly. And that's what I think of when I think of plastics. Don't beat yourself up, because if you're in a modern American supermarket, you'll see, for instance, the cut up fruit, as if we've lost our ability to chop fruit and vegetables. So that's an easy substitution, but there are a lot of things that we just don't have much choice on.
Just a
But there,
joke. I went to a health food store thinking, I'm going to buy bulk food from the health food store and put it all in glass containers in my home. So I went there and I realized every single container at the health food store was a plastic container. And so I didn't buy it. Just
Yeah.
Where do you start?
Yeah, that's why we need laws. So, we need systemic change. And as a former federal regulator, my idea of systemic change is strong laws with no loopholes and then enforcement of the law. So that's why these packaging reduction bills are so important.
but we should talk out this tension a little bit, because you sort of go through in the book multiple times. Individual responsibility is never going to solve this problem. It's too big, it's too embedded within the American economy, it's too profitable to stop just with a number of individuals consuming in a little more enlightened way. And yet you also go through and list, here are all the things that you can do individually to minimize your exposure to these plastics.
You notice that.
So how do these two sort of outlooks, these political outlooks of how we confront this plastic crisis, how do we connect them?
Yeah, so look, I try to avoid plastic whenever I can for a whole bunch of reasons, including protecting health, and you just can't avoid it. So do what you can. What I don't want to get is caught in the climate change trap where it said we have to reduce our carbon footprint. I want Exxon to reduce their carbon footprint. So I don't use the phrase plastic footprint. So, it may be a little counterintuitive, but we're hoping that people can protect their health, especially if you're pregnant, thinking of getting pregnant, or you're a little kid. You really want to reduce your exposure to plastics, and then get into the civic arena. Like everyone here tonight, you're all going to buy the book, you're going to give one to your library, you're going to be enraged, and you're going to take action. That's the plan.
And the plastics industry also is saying, we all use plastic, so we're all responsible for this problem.
Right, yeah. And they also, they attack us for wearing plastic eyeglasses. So it's, it's actually not that hard a narrative, and that's why I've coined the phrase pointless plastic. There's a lot of pointless plastic we can get rid of. Hi, Deb.
Hi. With friends, we've been talking about plastic a lot lately, and we've been coming up with crazy ideas, wild ideas, and send it all to the sun, There's so much of it that's already here, let alone what's being planned, to be produced. And there's so much of it, and just you picture those South Sea islands with the vast array of plastic just sifting in and sifting out. So just to get it off Earth, people are saying, can't we figure that? Can't we find another place to put it? So I wonder what you think of that, or if you've heard of other wild ideas that might actually be sound.
Yeah, that's a terrible idea. But you did put your finger on something. What do we do with everything that is already in our environment and building up in the marine environment? And the terrible thing about the ocean is you've seen the pictures of the gyres, right, the plastic islands. 99% of the plastic in the ocean has fallen to the seafloor. There's no way to get it back. And when plastic gets into the ocean, it's exposed to sunlight, it gets brittle, and then there's wave action, and it's almost like a paper shredder. So one plastic bottle becomes hundreds or thousands of little pieces of plastic, and it's in the marine environment. Fish eat it, sea turtles, birds, seabirds, albatross. So I don't want to ever throw in the towel, but I have not really figured out a way of how you get it back once it's out there, particularly in the ocean.
Like PCBs.
And you say in the book that your plastics don't break down, they just get smaller and smaller. And they're durable in shocking ways. And that the fact that I jumped out to me in my head, that there are more plastics in our ocean than there are stars in our galaxy. And we're only beginning to sort of, find ways of even calculating just the enormity of the problem.
Right. And unless the plastic was burned, which is a bad idea because it produces small amounts of dioxin, every piece of plastic ever made in the world is still with us today. It's on land, it's the bottom of the ocean, it's floating around in the air. What's kind of astonishing is plastics started being heavily used after World War II, and we're really just focusing on this in the last 5, 6, 7 years. You'd think they would have figured this out before they flooded the market with plastic, but here we are. Did you have a question?
Yeah. You say there's very little impact that individuals can have, and the ideal.
Well, he said that.
Yeah. And the ideal is ExxonMobil. But how about in between? Is there anything that that you talk about New York being a good a bill that you could pass, but how about Vermont? Is there anything that needs to be done in Vermont?
Yes, absolutely. So a couple years ago, Vermont was a real leader. They passed the plastic trifecta bill, banning plastic bags, banning polystyrene foam packaging, and the third provision, I don't remember, it's in the book. But I just spoke to Vermont Public Interest Research Group the other day, wonderful work by Paul Burns. They're going to be working on microplastic in personal care products bills. They're working on a bill to ban chemical recycling. I'm trying to talk them into the tethered cap on some bottle bill amendments. It was really heartbreaking. We supported Vermont PIRG and other groups in their work to expand the bottle bill, which your governor vetoed, which doesn't make any sense, except he seems to be pretty close with Casella Waste Company, and big landfill owners don't want less waste going to landfills. So we're working with groups in Vermont on a comprehensive agenda, and we don't think it's right for this year, but I'd love to lay the foundation for 2027 on a New York-style packaging reduction bill in Vermont, if the groups in Montpelier want to work on that.
And I suppose one difference with like climate change, because it is like a global thing, and the effects kind of happen on a global scale. It's much harder for I guess it doesn't affect the individual's actions don't affect that individual. They affect like the world a tiny amount for each individual. But then with plastics, I guess you can it concerns you what your actions
Right.
are.
You should write the next book. You got it. Yes. We all touch it every day. It's in our kitchen, right? It's in children's toys. It's in pacifiers. It's in chewing gum. We are going to start looking at plastics in chewing gum. So people touch it every day. I mean, they're still, contributing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's not as visible.
It's in dolphin's breath.
Yes, dolphin's breath, sea mist. You're on vacation at the ocean, it's like, smell that sea mist. That has microplastics in it.
So it seems like, well, it doesn't seem like it is such an uphill battle fighting plastics. It seems like you have to make larger and larger concessions like every single day, every time you fight for this against the lobbyists. And it's still like, even what you do get never seems like enough. I guess my question is, to imagine a world beyond plastics, you kind of have to imagine a world where, the people who are affected by this have more leverage than the people who make the decisions or are the producers of plastic, like Exxon. I guess, how do you imagine a world like that?
Yeah, that's beautifully stated. It would help if we had better democratic decision-making. The people who are so damaged by plastic production live in Louisiana, Texas, and Appalachia, where plastic is manufactured. There's a stretch of the Mississippi River called Cancer Alley. It's 85 miles between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, where there are hundreds of petrochemical facilities concentrated, many of them to make plastic, where the cancer rate is 7 times the national average. So our government and our business community has allowed for the creation of sacrifice zones, and these are mostly low-income people and/or people of color living in these communities. The governor of Louisiana is not standing up for the people living in Cancer Alley. So people in Vermont, in New York, and the world need to stand up for the people in Cancer Alley, following their lead. And the way we do that is reducing the demand for plastic. But this is the long game. We're not going to solve this in the next couple years. I think we can make progress, and I guess I'm more optimistic than most because I see what's happening all over the country. People care about this, and the medical issue is coming front and center, and we will get change. It takes a lot of organizing, and it also requires you to be both very politically savvy and politically unrealistic at the same time, if that makes sense. Like, who in their right mind would work on this? Like, who would create their whole life and lose sleep at night over plastic? Who does that? But yet, we get victories every so often, and it's the policy change that's going to shift the trajectory. And I cannot emphasize enough the role of students. Jumping into the arena, working on issues, getting to know environmental groups and civic groups that are working on these issues. You actually can make a whole career out of it. You don't get paid a lot, but you have a lot of fun. Should we wrap up?
That's a great question to sort of a statement to end on. So please join me in sort of thanking Judith for taking time.